and better than ever. Just kidding, we're recording a video, not a TikTok. Okay. We are on chapter 10. It's getting good. Let me read the questions first because I always seem to almost forget. Okay, chapter 10. There's only 6 questions. And we are going on another virtual field trip today, so don't forget to do that if you haven't already. Okay, chapter 10 questions. Number 1, what... Rude. That should take care of that. Number 1, what did Samuel wake up to? Number 2, what did they offer him to eat? Number 3, how many men were there in the group? Number 4, where were the men headed? Number 5, what did all the men do that made Samuel sick? And number 6, what is Coop's explanation for why Samuel's village was attacked? Exciting things to look forward to in the chapter. Okay, chapter 10. Let's see here. So, remember, he fell back asleep after Coop had handed him the food. He fell back asleep, and it says the last thing that he thought as he went under was that he still hadn't put his pants on. Chapter 10. This time, the sounds of men coughing and axes chopping wood for the fire awakened Samuel. He opened his eyes. The pain was much less, and saw that it was daybreak. Men were moving all around him. He started to roll, but the head pain stopped him, as well as the sudden memory that he had no pants on. The bedroll was next to him where Coop had put it. He snaked his pants out, put them on, and fastened them with the leather cord around the waist. The pain in his head had abated, which means that it kind of slowed down. It only jabbed if he moved suddenly. The wound felt tight, as if someone were pulling the top of his scalp together. When he unrolled the blanket, his rifle half fell out, and he saw that the lock had dirt jammed around the flint and pan, pushing up the striker plate or frizzen so the rifle was not able to fire. The men were making fire, tying bedrolls. One man had what looked to be a permanently bent left arm held up at a slight angle. He was sitting on the ground, cleaning his rifle. It made Samuel feel embarrassed that his own lock was so dirty. He found his possibles bag in the blanket roll. This was a pouch with the powder horn attached that hung around his neck, where he carried odds and ends of equipment for cleaning and firing his rifle. Inside, he had a tiny piece of steel wire. After blowing the dirt out of the pan and frizzen and flint, he used the wire to clean near the touch hole, which fed the jet of flame from the pan into the powder charge. Then he used an oily rag to clean the whole area and put some finely ground black powder into the pan. This was the ignition powder that the flint metal sparks would fire into the powder charge. He closed the frizzen over the pan, eased the hammer to half-cock safety, and set the rifle aside. The fire had flared up as the men added wood. Samuel rose to his feet and went into the nearby bushes to relieve himself. His legs were wobbly, but it seemed to work well enough, even though he felt weak as a kitten. Y'all remember what kind of figurative language that is? Bonus points if you can comment your name and what kind of figurative language that is under this video. His legs were wobbly, but seemed to work well, even though he felt as weak as a kitten. As one part of his body got better, another would follow. As the pain in his head went down, the hunger in his belly came up. There was the entire back leg from an ox over the fire on a metal spit. Last night, Coop had been cutting bits of it to put in Samuel's broth. Looking at it made Samuel even more ravenous, which means even more eager to eat. But the other men weren't eating, so he held back. One, a thin man with a scraggly beard, saw Samuel looking at the meat. He pulled a knife, a really short sword, carved off a generous piece, and handed it to Samuel. You gotta eat. We might walk long today, and it's going to be hard for you to keep up without your belly full. Thank you. Samuel took the meat. It was very tough. He sat chewing and swallowing, watching the men clear up camp. While Samuel watched the men and ate, he also rolled up and tied his own bedroll, making certain his powder was dry and his possibles bag was ready to go. But these men were even faster. Without speaking, except to grunt and point, they seemed to get everything done with the least effort and in the quickest time. The ox was yoked and tied off to a tree. The skid that Samuel had been on, which had two long tongues that went up either side of the ox and attached to the yoke, was hooked up and packed with extra equipment: the cooking pots, blankets, muskets, a small keg of powder, and another of whiskey, and, of all things, a drum left by the fleeing redcoats and Indians. Then the men came and stood by the fire. In silence, they cut pieces of meat and ate, drinking creek water out of a wooden bucket with a wooden dipper. Samuel still had dozens of questions, but since the men were silent as they stood staring into the fire while they chewed, he held his tongue. There were 7 men. When everyone was done eating, they each took a plug of tobacco and poked it in their cheek or lower jaw. They put the leftover meat on the skid, wrapped in a piece of green oxhide to keep the flies off, and then used the bucket to fetch water from the creek to put the fire out. With no effort at all, they were moving along the trail. 2 men went well ahead, one left, one right of the trail. The rest formed a column, if 5 men could be called a column, just ahead of the ox and Samuel. In Samuel's weakened condition, there was absolutely no way he could have kept up with the men, but the ox saved him. He knew that the oxen tend to plod a little less than 2 miles an hour, and this ox was slower yet. Even Samuel had no trouble keeping up with him, and when his legs felt a little weak, he would move to the ox's side and just hold on to the yoke, letting the ox pull him for a little time. Every hour and a half, 2 men walking ahead would come in and 2 others would move out. On one of these cycles, Coop came back and walked near Samuel. It was what Samuel had been waiting for. You kept me alive. Thank you. You weren't much. A little tobacco and spit and tough meat. I'd have been done for if you hadn't come along, Samuel said. Maybe, maybe not. One never knows how a wind is going to blow. Why did you all come along? Where are you going? Coop spit. All the men spit, almost all the time. Samuel had once tried tobacco, first in a clay pot, then taking a chew, and it made him sick as a dog. There's another piece of figurative language. He couldn't see the sense in using it, but all the men seemed to chew it all the time and spit like fountains. Maybe something happened to your taster when you got older, he thought, so you didn't mind it. We were going to join up, Cooper said, pointing east with his chin, and find them redcoats. There be a feller named Morgan round about Boston City, starting up Morgan's Rifles. We all shoot rifles, and we figure to give them redcoats a good taste of good shooting. They got nothing but muskets, good for nothing after 50, 60 yards. Carl here, he pointed up to where his brother walked beside the head of the ox, he can pink a man on a horse out to 200-300 yards every time. Wouldn't even know what hit him, nor where it came from. He nodded his chin at the group. Every man here can hit a square piece of paper every time at 200 yards. I suppose you could too, took a mind to it. I'm not sure about killing, Samuel said. Well, you did kill that Indian back there, laying dead and had a bullet hole in him. I wasn't really aiming. He shot and I pulled the trigger. What you gonna do when you find your ma and pa? Shake hands with the men that took them? Samuel felt like spitting too. I haven't thought that far yet. Best be thinking on it, Coop said, and keep your powder dry and your pan primed. Right. Thing is, I didn't even know there was anybody to fight. Who was good or bad, which side to be on. Coop snorted. Don't make such thinking. Them that starts into killing people for no reason, them that comes and takes your folks with a rope around their necks, they's the bad ones. Your good people don't do that. What reason? Samuel stumbled on a rock. To his surprise, the ox was aware of it and hesitated to let him catch up. Why did those British redcoats and Indians attack us like that? There was no reason. We weren't against the crown or rebels or anything. Coop spit, neatly taking a fly off the ox's ear. He snorted, redcoats doing it because they redcoats, and ain't worth a tinker's dang. Follerin' orders. Indians doing it because they was hired to. They're Iroquois. Most of them work for the English, always have, always will. Ever since that French war, they get all the plunder they can carry and scout money from the redcoats. Heard there's a man named Hamlin, some kind of redcoat officer, buys so many scalps they call him Hair Buyer Hamlin. That's what I don't understand is why they took your folks instead of killing them. Oh, look, the front line's coming in. The column stopped by a clear water creek and everybody drank. Then the men took the meat off of the drag and sat in a circle cutting pieces and chewing. At first Samuel hung back, but Carl motioned him to squat and eat. Samuel was feeling stronger by the minute, and the meat heated him up like fire. No one talked much. No one talked much except for Coop. And when they finished, they rose, took a chew of tobacco, and set off. Coop and another man went ahead. Samuel walked in silence, hanging onto the wooden shaft tied to the ox. It was mid-morning, and the sun fell through the tall trees on either side of the trail, so they seemed to be walking in a lightened green tunnel. Now and then, insects caught sunlight and flashed white like small lamps. Any other time, Samuel would have been taken by the beauty of it, but now he could not stop and think of what Coop had started to say. Why hadn't the raiders killed his parents? And would they do it now? I'm way behind them, he thought. 6, maybe 7 days, dragging along with an ox. God only knows what's happening to them. I have to go faster. We're doing good. There's only 19 chapters to the book, so we're on chapter 10, so we're over halfway done with the book. So I will reread the questions so that way you can go answer them. Some of y'all were complaining last week because it was confusing to put the questions up while you were listening. So if it's easier, I now recommend you to watch the video of me reading and then go answer the questions. Even if that means you listening to it more than once, it wouldn't hurt you. At least you'll know what's going on in the book. So the questions. Number 1, what did Samuel wake up to? Number 2, what did they offer him to eat? Number 3, how many men were there in the group? Oh, I lost my spot. Hold on. Number 4, where were the men headed? Number 5, what did all the men do that made Samuel sick? And number 6, what is Coop's explanation for why Samuel's village was attacked? Okay, hopefully you can understand what Coop was saying with my attempt at a country accent. So, y'all get to doing your questions, and I will see you guys for the next video.